breaking news out of Beirut, where Hezbollah's media relations chief has been killed in an airstrike in central Beirut. Mohammed Afif was killed in the Israeli raid. The district of Ras al-Nabaa in central Beirut was targeted without warning. 3 others were injured in an attack. It's one of a number of strikes in the past few hours. Well, to Dan Perry now, who's a former regional editor of the Associated Press. He also served as the chair of the Foreign Press Association of Israel. He joins us live from Tel Aviv. A very warm welcome to Al Jazeera. So I'm sure you've heard the news, the killing of Mohammed Afif, a well-known media figure within Beirut, the link between Hezbollah as a military organisation, as a political, social force within Lebanon itself, and indeed the media. Your first reaction to his killing?
Well, as your correspondent was saying, Hezbollah's narrative clearly is that whoever they kill, they're going to be able to replace. I'm not surprised that they did this. I assume it was intentional. Israel's position, as I have been saying on your channel for some time, is one where they have lost all patience with the very existence of Hezbollah. So you have 2 competing narratives here. One says, no matter what you do to us, we're going to prevail and be steadfast. The other says, if we have to, we'll destroy everything standing that relates to Hezbollah. And, you know, Israel's position, I don't think is indefensible because, I mean, Hezbollah is controlled by a foreign entity and has taken over part of Lebanon. I know they have some support in Lebanon, obviously much support within the Shia community. But this really is something I think that Lebanon, the Lebanese government that has been for a while now used to sort of maintaining plausible deniability about not controlling its own country, is going to have to come to terms with. I don't think Israel will give up. And whoever they appoint in his place, I'm sure will be targeted again. Because Israel's position is that Hezbollah, as a non-state actor parked on its borders and attacking it, is completely illegitimate from the point of view of the world order.
As we've been discussing, the interesting distinction about Mohammed Afif is that he was a man who came with a media background, not a military background. He is also targeted in an area that isn't traditionally a Hezbollah stronghold. What does that say to you about the scale, the scope, and the likely future targets that Israel may be weighing up right now within Lebanon?
Well, I do believe that despite considerable damage in Lebanon, Israel understands that that is, at the very least, politically difficult and morally indefensible to have great destruction to the infrastructure of Lebanon. They don't want it. So I think it's not like they're going to proceed unchecked. But I do believe that this is a signal that they're happy to go after more public figures that maybe have a tad more legitimacy than the pure militants, and that they're no longer limiting themselves to the Dahia neighborhood. And also interesting that they didn't issue any warnings. Clearly that suggests this was a targeted killing. It's an upping of the ante and an effort, I assess, to put pressure on all the powers that be, including the government of Lebanon, but also the U.S. negotiators, that there must be a deal that involves, at the very least, implementation of 1701. But I think probably the Israelis really want 1559, which involves a disarming of the militias in Lebanon. Now, realistically, ask yourself, what is the argument against implementing 1559, which the Lebanese government approved of as well? It's complicated, and it's a major power play. And basically, it's a test of wills between Israel and Iran.
Israel's new defence chief only a couple of weeks ago made a rather striking announcement that he believed that Hezbollah had been defeated. Was he talking about solely militarily, or was he talking about the group as a whole and all of the areas of Lebanese life that it operates in, as a social, as an economic, as a political force? And nevertheless, only in the last 24 hours, we've seen Hezbollah strike militarily into northern Israel. Were those claims a little bit premature?
A little bit premature? I mean, look, Netanyahu, for political reasons that are rather shameful, replaced a respected general who was one of the few people in his cabinet that had support across the Israeli political landscape and aligned to the U.S. administration. He replaced Gallant with Katz, who is a political apparatchik with no security background and not a lot of respect across the political landscape. So I'm sure he wanted to sound tough. His statement was obviously premature. And Katz is essentially a puppet. The real defense minister is nothing.
I mean, many Arabs, I suppose, are from the Middle East watching the appointment of pro-Zionist hawks to Donald Trump's future government with huge amounts of concern. But is it a given that Trump will embolden Netanyahu and Israeli dominance over the occupied territories, for instance?
I don't think so. I understand that's one way to look at it, and certainly if you consider Mike Huckabee, who believes that Judea and Samaria should be integrated into Israel despite the demographic disaster that entails for Israel itself. Well, sure, it looks that way. But the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is not a MAGA person. He's a moderate pragmatist from the old establishment, young, old establishment of the pre-Trump Republican Party. He's pro-Israel for sure. He has great clarity about Hamas having sparked the war, and he's spoken of the barbaric October 7th attack, so fine. He doesn't buy the narrative that October 7th was somehow defensive. Not many people in America do. But I think, like Trump, he would like to see a deal. He doesn't want to see a forever war. I remember that Trump in 2020, I think it was, proposed essentially an independent Palestinian state, not enough land for the Palestinians, with other problems from their perspective, but it was a partition of the Holy Land as opposed to an annexation of the West Bank and Gaza. I think Rubio is also a supporter of that. And primarily, Trump, while he may care less than Biden does about humanitarian aspects of a war, of a difficult war in an urban environment with militants dug in among civilian infrastructure, Biden cares about that. Trump realistically doesn't. But he doesn't love forever wars. That's why he ended the war in Afghanistan. Biden pulled out, but Trump agreed to essentially capitulation to the Taliban. Trump has stated that he wants the Ukraine war to end on day one. He wants Israel to find a way to end this war, and I don't think he necessarily will put up with something that looks like Netanyahu-esque machinations to continue it for whatever reason.
Nevertheless, in this period of, let's call it, uncertain transition as the Biden administration empties its drawers and the Donald Trump administration gets ready to take office in the White House, an awful lot is happening in the region. It seems like Israel is hitting targets beyond its immediate remit. In Damascus, for instance, in the past few days, Israel says it's been going after Islamic Jihad cells operating in the Syrian capital. Are we staring at a new theatre of conflict here for Israel, or is this, particularly in Syria, just an extension of existing wars?
I tend to go the latter route. Remember, Israel's been operating in Syria ever since Syria fell apart about a decade ago, quite legitimately from their perspective, attacking anything connected to the Iranian weapons supply transiting Syria to Hezbollah, and we see the result of the insufficient effort in that regard, with Hezbollah having emerged as the largest non-state military force on earth. I think it's maybe a slight ratcheting up, but we've seen other spikes. I think that's more the same. It all attaches to the same fundamental thing. You can say Israel's presence in the West Bank is illegitimate. You can argue that Israel's own interest should dictate a partition, as I said, of the Holy Land. But I just don't know too many rational players on earth, including in the Sunni Arab world, that think that Hezbollah is okay and that Hamas is okay. Unless you want nihilism and endless war. Netanyahu, like Trump, knows how to identify the potential for a win. He sees here that the world may be tired of this war. And he sees that most of the West, though they may criticize Israel's tactics and they hate the stupendous level of destruction in Gaza, do agree with the end game. They really do. Even Macron in France, certainly Germany, the British do. And boy, oh boy, Trump does. So you're going to be somewhat isolated from much of the West if you're in any way supporting a continuation of the Hamas and Hezbollah chaos project, and basically the Iran chaos project. That's just a fact of life. And a lot of players in the region are going to have to decide what they do with this new type of clarity. I don't think, as I said, that this means they're going to support Israel's far right in whatever it wants to do. And I do think they want a settlement, or at least a reasonable negotiation towards a settlement on the Israeli-Palestinian front. Certainly a ceasefire or an end to the war. But they're extremely sympathetic to Israel's plight. And I think they want to see massive pressure on Hamas to essentially give up, hand over the hostages, and move on. Now,
Okay.
of course, the trick is that this requires Netanyahu to accept the Palestinian Authority returning to Gaza.
Right.
He hasn't done this, and that'll be impression.
Dan Perry, always good to hear your thoughts and analysis. Thanks for joining us.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel to get the latest news from Al Jazeera.